Okay, we can start now. Welcome everybody. Glad to see so many young people today. Actually, there was a joke I will tell you later, because there was a group of youngsters coming with a bus. And some people made jokes. Usually in the Balkans, people are taken by bus for elections, for voting or something like this. What is this? Is it a political rally? No, just interested people to hear what we can do in terms of improving the good neighborly relations, cooperation in the region among the youth. So, welcome, dear young people. Welcome to all the guests on the stage here, supporters of young people. I'm really glad to be able to practically host the closing session. It's going to be a long one, actually. We have too many panelists. Almost half of Europe is present here. So we'll have 2 lineups. 13 chairs. It's not Friday 13th, but we did it on purpose, actually, just to chase the evil spirits, just in case something happens. Unfortunately, yesterday we had incident. Everybody was fine. We had a courageous young woman that we praised. Also, a courageous young man here. Miloš, he had a bit back pain, but now he's fine and he's continuing the work today. We started the Prespa Forum Dialogue this year with the first opening session, the warm-up with a youth panel on the youth involvement in green and energy transition, something that is very important. We put it in line with our OSCE priorities during this year's chairpersonship with OSCE. Then we had the second panel, which was on combating brain drain, practically focusing on skills and opportunities, which turned out to be very positive. Though some expected criticism, actually turned out very well, because we had people from the real sector with the support, actually, from the Swiss embassy, which I want to greet here. They really supported us. They brought 3 projects that they're funding. Youth projects, startups, to share their positive experiences. We got the support for the State Secretary Liu. And I would like to express my gratitude on this occasion. And of course, the EU Ambassador David Gear, who is very much focused on the young people. We have a lot of representatives also from the other EU embassies, which are supporting the young people. So we are going to continue working on youth engagement. So this panel is actually focused on good practices that exist in other regions that can be actually implemented here in the Western Balkans. And with the focus on the youth cooperation, we'll present later the participants here on the stage. But actually the bus with the people was from another project, actually, which is a side event of the Prespa Forum, supported by the US Embassy in Skopje for already 2 years in a row, also on regional cooperation and on good practices, which is being implemented by a local youth organization, Crucial Youth Alliance, who are very much engaged into connecting people from the region. They have a vast portfolio. We will hear the oldest youngster later in the second lineup. But that's why we have as a special guest speaker here, actually the new spokeswoman, yes, women are brave, let's do it like this, of the US Embassy, Dolores Pran. And please give the opening remark. Thank you for all the support that you are doing for the young people. Actually, just before you say something, I would like to say how much the US Embassy is engaged here. Just a month ago, we went there with a group of young diplomats, with direct exchange with the ambassador. We are working on several other projects. And of course, we should not forget, US is also our strategic partner, and we have the strategic dialogue. And I'm glad that we can put also this youth engagement and youth cooperation in this frame, and hope with the Public Relations Department, we will have a lot of other successful projects together with the youth. Wait, take the floor.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I am extremely happy to be here. I am the brand new 2-week anniversary into my job as spokesperson and public affairs officer at the U.S. Embassy. And I, first of all, wanted to say how proud we are to support youth engagement and youth activism around the world, and particularly here in North Macedonia. As Philippe mentioned, this is our second year of supporting another sort of youth forum on the fringes of this one that is dedicated to ideas, and we call it the Ideathon. And this year's theme is Resilient Peace. And because it's the second year, we have the benefit of knowing how much we've progressed and where we've come from. And I hope that the participants this year will see that we've heard the message of the inaugural year, and we've tried to build on the ideas. One of them was to improve access, and I think that having this sort of joint event has been a great sort of testament to how we're trying to work to provide that. I think it's very appropriate that we're here just one day before the 5-year anniversary of the Prespa agreement. The action plan in Article 6 particularly singled out youth as a critical component, and we couldn't agree more for the future of the region and the future of this country, the future of the world. Our youth have given us a mandate, and that mandate is regional cooperation. It's about celebrating our differences and building on our similarities. And I want to just say that we really enjoy supporting not just this sort of youth engagement, but all kinds, because civic engagement is really a hallmark of a strong democracy. And so I want to just sort of conclude my remarks by saying welcome, particularly to the youth here today. I want to thank the Secretary and the Minister and all my distinguished fellow guests here for having me. And I want to commend you all on your dedication, your work, your activism, your ideas, and especially your idealism that I think are necessary for the future. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Dolores. And as I said, we'll have a very fruitful cooperation in the future. I'm really also focused on opening up the ministry for the youth. You know, it's also part of the national youth strategy that has been adopted. We would like to see more engagement on behalf of the ministries and the institution, and that's why now we go to our keynote speaker, our culture minister. Actually, why I call Bisera, she's a young one. She's very committed to the young people. She comes from the city of Consols, Bitola, which has a thriving cultural life and still has a vast youth community there. Recently, also Europe House was, the officer's house was, and which is being used for cultural events, and she's very much focused on supporting young artists. Of course, also within the region, we have the Open Balkan Initiative as well. We organize several events. The next one will be in Paris. So, dear Minister, thanks for being here and for accepting the invitation. It's a pleasure to have you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Благодарам за комплиментот.
Thank you for the compliment.
Почитувани
Distinguished guests, having in mind the topic that has been overreaching within this Prespa Forum,
и имајќи го во предвид
having in mind the topic of this panel, I was thinking on how to start my address, and how to explain to you why regional cooperation is important, not only in the area of youth, but also in the area of culture and art. And I decided to share with you an example, a book that I watched recently as its second adaptation in a movie. So when I read the novel, the name called man called Uwe by Bachmann, my initial reaction was why a young person would read a book that is at times slow-paced for a very disgruntled guy, a middle-aged guy. But when I saw the second movie being made about this novel in an American way and now retitled as The Man Called Otto, I came back to the same book and I got the answer to my question why a young person would read such a difficult, slow-paced book for a middle-aged, grumpy guy. Because the world needs more useful, disgruntled, grumpy guys that have a big heart. And at a certain moment, you might think you have neighbors from hell, but that is until you meet them. And that is when you get this big lesson, not to judge anyone until you have met them properly, because everyone can lose their colors, quotation marks, or everyone can lose their power or can turn off the electricity. I think all of us need a neighbor like Uwe, because you need someone to open the door for you when you're chased away from your home because you were different, to help you when you're in trouble because you used to be mad at each other for years and you didn't notice that he could fix everything in your house that is broken. But I think that each Uwe needs a very live neighborhood, because this is how life is and this is how the rules governing it are. Everything is two-sided. Whether it doesn't matter what type of car you drive, it's important that you drive and you go on this road, on this trip. We want to be good neighbors in the Balkans, and we do everything to be good neighbors. We want to be partners in positive changes that move forward the Balkans and the entire world. And this is not always easy and it's not always just, but we're not looking for excuses on how it would be the easiest not to do something. We decided to have a constructive dialogue, a cooperation, accepting the reality. We decided to make compromises that are worthy of respect, but not for them to be interpreted as our weakness. And we, as everyone else, built our country on tears, on sweat, blood, and fight. And fight is the most important segment on how a country is built. Also, we paid the high price of victory, and I think that our place is in the EU. If the past 2 years have taught us something, that would be that social distancing is good only in conditions of world pandemic and crisis from a deadly virus, but that cooperation and solidarity are truly the key point that is needed in humanity. We really appreciate all the benefits from the Berlin process for integration of the Western Balkan countries. We're very happy with the high-level support of the Open Balkans initiative, especially in young people. But what troubles me, not as a minister, not as a young woman, but as a mother, as an English language teacher, as a woman, as a university professor that encounters this Euroscepticism on a daily basis, is that it is growing. So that is why I want to remind you and show you some of the positive examples of regional cooperation that we have, which of course are not a substitution for the EU membership, but show a good starting point and a good example that truly we can overcome borders, especially through culture, education, and art. Namely, everyone that this decreases the value of culture and art, then they're the ones that lose and do not live in their own country. We have Macedonian cultural centers in Tirana, Sofia, Istanbul, Zagreb, and soon there will be one in Belgrade, which are true representations of our culture and really show the cooperation that we have in the countries where they are located. They are a center of our cultural workers, artists in those countries, and our artists and craftsmen that wish to show their culture there and that create art there and come from the Republic of North Macedonia. The Ministry of Culture, for which I have the honor to lead, very recently established a cooperation with the European Center for Byzantium and Post-Byzantium memorials. And together we have been working on preservation of the angel from Corbino, the St. George Church in Prespa. And for us, this is a great honor and pleasure. Last year, we became part of the cultural roots of the Council of Europe. We recognize roots where we will be good co-travelers, but we have our own roots where we can be excellent coats. The biggest value are our young people, particularly in this cooperation. And this is why I would like to use this opportunity to state that the young people in this region must not lose the sense of being European and must not feel less European than other European people. We all need each other. The EU needs us and we need the EU, especially in times like this. In the end, because I don't want to speak too long and I want to leave room for the rest of the panelists, but also for questions and answers, I would like to mention that the best-selling novel that I opened with, and that is The Man Called Uwe, has been published in Macedonia in 2019 through the Creative Europe program supported by the EU together with our Ministry of Culture. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm expecting your questions. Thank you, Bisera, for the creative answer.
Actually, beside being a professor in English, that she held a speech in one other European language also, our own language, the Macedonian language. And thank you for this. I know that it's very important for you, and you always do this. And it's really important to repeat this message that we are part of the family, our identity and our language are part of this. And then we move to our special guest address. And actually, that's how I came up with the idea for the panel on this topic, sharing really good practices from other regions. Many years ago, I was following the pages of the Scandinavian countries, these tourism pages and various others that they have. It's actually official Facebook or Twitter pages, and they're poking each other with jokes that if we would do this here, I think there would be a war on the social media, but actually they turn into a fun thing and a laughter. And then I said, we're not so even different, though we are kind of far away. This is like the south, that is the north. They have had turbulent past as well, maybe a century ago, but now Nordic countries are an example for really good neighborly relations, good integration, good bilateral and regional cooperation. They have the Nordic Council, which has a lot of formats of formal cooperation, actually. And then, of course, is the Swedish Council presidency with the EU. And there is no better representative than the ambassador of Sweden in North Macedonia, dear Ami friend, who also was actually the guest speaker on the pre-event, also on the youth event, and she's very much engaged in supporting the youth. And then she said, okay, I like your idea. I will establish contact. And we did it in a very short notice. And you know, we do here in the Balkans or in the South, everything in the very last moment. And on a very short notice, you will meet, we have two representatives from two countries from the Nordic Council that will share the experiences. But thank you, Ami, for cooperation. We have had exchanged a lot of ideas that we will implement also in future. And I give you now the floor. Thank you for supporting us.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here today and to be part of this panel. Like you, I think we've started well now with some Swedish references. I'm glad you enjoyed this book, so do I. What I can also say is that in the spirit of this very Nordic cooperation, the Swedish Embassy is very happy to have not two Swedes here, but actually an Icelandic and a Norwegian representative, each from the Nordic Council. So this is how closely we work, that we get others to represent us. But let me first just say thank you so much again for having me on this panel. Madam Minister, State Secretary, ladies and gentlemen. I would say that it's a good starting point, I think, to discuss good neighborly relations and the structures that that can take. And I'm very honored that you've chosen to use the Nordics as a good example in this case. In fact, I represent Sweden in this country, but I do actually also represent the Nordic countries, because I'm the only Nordic present, the only Nordic embassy. I miss my Nordics, I'll be honest. I'd love to have some company, but that also means that I represent the other countries when it comes to, for example, support to citizens of those countries here. So if you need consular support, if you're Nordic, you come to us. And that is just something we do, and it comes very naturally. The Nordic family is in fact one of the oldest and most closely knit regional cooperation structures. We are very similar, but we also have some distinct differences. But we very much feel this way, that we are part of the Nordic family, and we feel very safe in that company. It wasn't always like this, and you pointed to that. Over the last 1,000 years, because we do have a long history together, we've had plenty of times when we've actually been at war with each other, we've occupied each other's territories, there's been violent uproar. Sweden just celebrated 500 years as a country, and that's from the time that we rebelled against the Danish. So it's a violent past, but today we're very far from that, and in the last, say, 200 years or so, we've started moving towards cooperation instead. So we went from war and conflict to excellent good neighborly relations, and if we can do that, we are certain that that's possible everywhere. What I would also like to say is that then, with time, this has moved into then quite a structured kind of cooperation. So in 1971, the Nordic Council was set up, and we'll hear more about that. But jointly, the Nordic Council has, the countries have come together to set up a vision for 2030, to be the most competitiveness and the greenest and strongest, also socially sustainable region in Europe. The regional cooperation, of course, plays a really important part for the region. But in fact, it's also very good for each country. And when we sort of pool our resources, we in the Nordic countries together form the 11th largest economy in the world. So we don't just qualify as part of the G20, but in fact as the G10. And I'll make some, and I realize that this is tricky territory, but I'd like to make some comparisons to the Western Balkans. There's many things that we share, but also, of course, differences. But both of our regions have a very rich history. We've had periods of conflict and wars, but we've also had time when we are under the same rule, when we have formed unions together, and we're also not huge. We're small countries with relatively small populations and markets. And what we've seen then in the Nordics is that then, as this small country, we can't make all that difference on our own. We need to join up with our neighbors. But then when we do, we can actually have a very good effect, and we can be quite impactful on the international stage. For now, the Nordic countries work together on political issues, on security matters, in education and research, and of course together we promote shared values in democracy and human rights, not least. What we see now in the Western Balkans is there's similar roots, that this kind of cooperation is also taking roots here, which is a great thing and which we support. We're very supportive of, not least because we know that this is also an excellent piece to bring when North Macedonia and its neighbors join the EU, already having this deeply rooted set collaboration in many ways. And it'll be great to see the mutual recognition of ID cards, professional qualifications, and university degrees come into force and really start to emulate what we have, because we also have the same thing in the Nordics. With that, I would then like to wrap up and just say that I'm glad that we have young voices that will also speak about the Nordic experience. So thank you again for inviting us.
Yes. Thank you, Ami. And now we have here Ilya Jugumanov, my co-moderator, actually the Secretary General of the Euro-Atlantic Council, with whom we recently had actually a joint event, also with youth, in cooperation with the Visegrad countries on this information. So he's also very much focused on the youth, and thank you for accepting to come here. I know that you're tired. He just flew back from Brussels, where he took some young people in a visit of the NATO headquarters. Okay, Ilya, now we start with Q&As. Actually, I give the participants to you.
Thank you, State Secretary. Thank you for the nice introduction. Dear Minister, dear Ambassador, dear colleagues, dear guests, dear friends. I'm very glad to see actually almost full room at the few last panels at this forum. As the State Secretary said, we had his introduction, so I won't mention that this might be the longest panel. We'll try to make it short, concise, and pragmatic, because we want to show that the youth are working in that way. As the State Secretary mentioned, we will cover the good practices and the good examples from the other regions than the Western Balkans. Because growth is never made by mere chance. It is a result of a long-term commitment and partnership. So I really think that today, between these young colleagues, we'll have a great partners that will try to share their knowledge and their experience to most of us. So since Milos was on the crime scene today, actually I took his place here. I will start with him because he didn't have the chance to address yesterday. So Milos, you're in Brussels. You're working for the European Youth Forum there. You're pretty much involved in your career with a lot of international organizations and bodies, so we really know that, especially in the Western Balkan region, all the international organizations are pushing the youth to be part of each programs of projects and everything. But to be honest, most of the time, I guess I can still say that I'm part of this youth generation. We are most of the time the passive listeners when we need to raise our voice. Maybe we are not allowed, which is not case of the Prespa Forum. We didn't have a side event for the youth, but we have the youth panels incorporated from the beginning of the Prespa Forum, and I'm very glad to finish this forum with this youth panel together with my colleague Dimitar. So that is why I will try to be concise and pragmatic and to finish on time to leave more time also for the next panel. So Milos, we know that we are not engaged on the level we deserve. You work with the high-level stakeholders. So what is your experience? How we should better address youth issues among the stakeholders in order to be the real partner on the table?
Thank you very much. I hope that this works. Thank you very much, Blagodaram. And thank you for the invitation and giving me the space to speak here in the name of the European Youth Forum. Dear Minister, Ambassador, State Secretary, thank you for giving me this space to speak here. Yesterday, actually, I would like to point out that in this forum, I had the chance yesterday to speak on the high-level opening, and it's actually quite a privilege to address. I was able to address directly in the name of the young people and the European Youth Forum, the ministers, the prime minister, the presidents of the different countries represented here in the diplomatic corps. And I think that this is a good way forward. I think that it's good to have the space where we talk among us, among young people, but it's also good to have the space to actually speak with the stakeholders where we can present directly on high-level panels. I yesterday started in the same way, and it's quite a privilege to actually speak here from a European perspective, even though I grew up in this country, even though I started my activism here, and I was active in a local youth organization, a local youth center, and then afterwards I started being active on European level through different European platforms. You rightfully said so. It's a privilege for us because in the name of the European Youth Forum, we support the integration. We are doing it already. In the European Youth Forum, the National Council of North Macedonia, the National Council of Serbia, of Albania, are already full members or candidate members, so they're part of the European family. We are working with the national youth councils from the other Western Balkan countries to make sure that they also join in, and then we have the whole palette of the countries to be represented there. And then we can see how things changed in the European Youth Forum when we started getting the Western Balkans countries. There is a strong expertise there, which is on reconciliation, which is on neighborhood work, which is on regional approach on how do we work with issues, which was represented by the different initiatives from the Nordic countries, from the Franco-German collaboration, from different areas, but this area specifically here saw war 30 years ago, and this area actually now has a know-how on how to actually speak about the current war, which is happening in Europe, and this is something that we very much value. With the national councils from the region, we are very happy that they were the ones who spoke with the Black Sea region national youth councils to speak on what does it mean to be in civil society, to be in a youth organization after having war, internal conflicts, and how we can actually preserve what we have as structure. The question was on how can we make sure that there is more participation, how can we make sure that there is actually a participation which is going to be heard from the stakeholders. And here I'm going to be echoing probably what the national youth councils from this region already speak for quite some time. We need to address and speak and work with the national youth councils and the organized civil society in a structured manner. We cannot see it only through a project perspective. We cannot only see it through a perspective of something which is happening now with some region, because this is how we are instrumentalizing. And this is where we actually, as young people in the region, we see that we're always invited just because there is an instrument or there is a discussion that we need to bring in a perspective. And if we do not have a structural support, if there is not a structural space, we as young people tend to feel is that if there is a discussion on climate, yeah, we are the first ones that will take the streets because we are the proactive part of the society. If there is a discussion on student rights, we will take the streets. If we want to speak about culture, engagement, we will take the streets. We are not only sitting in panels like this, thank you very much for inviting us, but we also do other activities. We are in the youth centers, we are in the different other activities, and this only will be stronger and stronger if it's not momentum, if this is something that is structurally supported through funding, through fora, through investment in local youth councils, in national youth councils, in youth centers, supporting the youth strategies, and etc. When it comes to just as the last point, and I'm going to give the space to the other fellows, young people who are speaking here with their experience, is on the need of regional collaboration. In the European Youth Forum, we have the national youth councils, which are the one pillar, and we have the European organizations, such as the Erasmus Student Network, the World Scout Movement, the Federalists, and other international organizations who are sitting there. But we see that when it comes to any type of localization on anything which is a European competence, the regional approach supports it, because we would never have the same amount of resources per country, and we need the regions to be collaborating with each other in good manner to be able to bring it back home in their region, from initiatives of youth dialogues to initiatives of banning unpaid internships to climate change to being part of the green agenda. When we are actually having a support through the regional perspective and we have fora like this actually supports. So the resources are not invested parallelly in the different countries, but they actually come together. And this is where we make sure that young people, such as myself, and also other fellow young people representing being delegates in organizations, big organizations like the Youth Forum, can be supported, come to leadership role, and bring in the vision to the region. The regional collaboration is very needed, and it's actually something that we do work with the European Youth Forum. I'm not going to take more time, just also in the spirit to get some questions afterwards from the young people in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Milos, and thank you for respecting the time limit, even it was my mistake not mentioning it. So I will kindly ask you to keep the limit between 3 to 5 minutes so we can open the floor for questions from the audience. As the next speaker, we have Dag Henrik Nygaard from the Nordic Youth Association in the UNR Presidium from Norway. So now we are moving to the High North. Usually, when we want to give a good example in the Balkan region, in the Western Balkans, we always choose the countries that are on the north, mainly Norway, Sweden, and also the other countries. There are several regional initiatives starting from defense, education, that are maybe the best examples of regional cooperation. So from your experience, how it started, what are the good practices, and how can we somehow implement these good examples in the Balkan region? Doug, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. So the Nordic is made up by Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland, and Finland. And we have been connected for hundreds of years, but of course not without conflict in those cases. Today, we see each other as equal, and I think that is an important point. And that it's necessary to be able to cooperate in a good way. It is a goal to be the world's most integrated region within 2030. It has to be a certain level of binding agreements between the nations. In our case, the Helsinki Agreement was signed in 1962, and it is still the important frame of our diverse cooperation. Nordic official cooperation is organized in Nordic Council, where decision makers from all the Nordic countries come together. All parties are present, and I think that it has to be some kind of structure and continuous cooperation. On the youth side, we have one session each year with youth parties attending. We write and vote on resolutions that can be adopted and worked furthermore. Each party group has one member in our presidium, and that works between the sessions. The presidium also have 2 observers in the Nordic committees, so among the adults. Something else that is needed to be able to cooperate long-term is the fact that the cooperation is wanted by a majority of the population. And that is the case. We see that many resolutions voted in the session for youths have a goal of making border obstacles less restricting, making life easier for regular people in the Nordic countries. Examples could be access to the other countries' public services. Then we'll learn the language and the culture, for instance. More education about the Nordics in our schools, and also easier exchange in higher education, and also similar things to that. The Scandinavian languages are very similar to each other, and it is an important part of our cooperation. So culture and language is also involved in, is very important in our cooperation. The religion is the same, and the culture is very similar. And this common ground of values is very important to reach the goal of being the most integrated region by 2030. So the adults have to make it possible for youths to cooperate with each other, and that's the adults' goal, and when that's done, the youths have to go on and cooperate and want to, I mean, it is a good feeling that we can be supported by our neighbors and that we want to support our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug. Our next speakers will stay at the north. So our next speaker is Joshua Davidson. I'm sorry I cannot reach you with my eyes, but I hope you are here from the Socialist Youth in the Nordic region on the UNR Presidium from Iceland. So your colleague mentioned that your region will be one of the most integrated until 2030. There are a lot of initiatives ongoing in the Western Balkan. One of the newest and maybe most common is the open. I would say there are a lot of them. I won't mention one, like the Open Balkan. So, but we are still not the most integrated region. We still hope that we'll be part of the Europe until 2030. But can you tell us more on how can youth progress in this and how can youth influence this cooperation on a regional level? Because we are the future leaders. We are those that need to run the country in the future period. So please, Joshua, the floor is yours.
Yes. Yeah, very good question. Thank you very much. Youth participation within a region, like you said, is a very important thing, and it is a surefire way to foster better relations between nations. But it isn't just that simple that you have to let them participate. They have to have a voice that is listened to. There has to be an impact to participating. If the effort does not lead to results, it would only further alienate the youth. The voice of the youth need to be acted on, and then, and only then, can you say that youth participation is accomplished. Everything else and anything less equates to youth washing. There are some examples where this has not gone that well in the Nordics. For example, even though the general perception might be that it's pretty perfect and everything goes well, within my party in Iceland, the Young Left Greens, we had a lot of problems actually getting our voice to get heard. We participated in the meetings and everything seemed completely fine, but then nothing happened. They didn't listen. But then we had to start fighting for our voice. We had to constantly ask them to do something about it. And after a while, we saw some change with that. And it got a lot better, and then we got to see some change where our voice was actually heard. And it was not on purpose that our party did this, but this is a typical example of how youth parties are listened to. Their voice is not taken into account, but the Youth Nordic Council and the Nordic Council is a very good example of how this should be done. The Youth Nordic Council, the very positive thing about it is it's across borders, it's cross-political, but not only that, we have great relations with our mother party in a way, the Nordic Council. And that is very important because without it, then your voice really isn't heard. And like Doug Hendrik talked about, we have seats in all the committees, and we have speaking rights. And a very good example of how the youth can cooperate and help within the Nordic Council is that right now the Helsinki Agreement that is binding us together and forcing us to work together is right now in a process of revision. And the youth has a big part in this. We have a seat in the Presidium where this is being worked on, and we get to be a part of forming this, the foundation of the Nordic Council. And this is something that really should be looked up to and should be worked towards. The youth should be able to have an effect like this, and it shows that they trust the youth because the youth have this experience and they follow this. They trust the youth. But of course, the Nordic Council isn't perfect in all ways. There are some problems. We still have to constantly work on keeping these relations, and we have to constantly keep on making it better. It's a constant process. But it's still a good example of how it should be done, and it should definitely be taken into example within the Balkan area, for example. And if you follow this and do this when you work on youth participation, I am sure that it will lead to a more united region, especially within the youth.
Thank you very much, Joshua, for your intervention. So now we move to the south. As the next speaker, we have Hussein Silman. Luckily, you're close to me. Welcome, Hussein. He's president of the Global Policy Center from Cyprus. He has knowledge and experience in bilateral cooperation. He's working on reconciliation, but also peace building internally on regional level. So I will appreciate if you can share your knowledge on the topic. The floor is yours, Hussein.
Thank you very much, Ilya. I've been here since Wednesday, and I've been hearing, the things I'm hearing are deja vu for me, because we've been experiencing similar issues and topics in Cyprus. And I realize that it's not a well-known place for rest of the world. It looks like a small dot on the world map. But let me just briefly inform you about Cyprus. It's following the end of the British colonial rule, the Cyprus island declared independence in 1960. It was a bicommunal power-sharing republic. Then they receive technical assistance to how they can realize their projects. There's another project called Go Social Cyprus, where study visits and internship opportunities for Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot youngsters, both in the island but also elsewhere in the world. EU recently supported a youth organization. It's a youth center in a city called Kyrenia, where they organize a joint project with their Greek Cypriot peers, and they provided small grants to creative ideas by young entrepreneurs. There are also scholarships provided because Turkish Cypriots cannot enjoy Erasmus plus opportunities, so there is a tailor-made scholarship. And this also includes Turkish Cypriots studying in the universities in the southern part of Cyprus. The green line is the name given to the line dividing the island. So there's an increasing number of trade across the island. EU recently established a one-stop shop to support young businessmen who would like to cooperate and increasing their interaction. Finally, I want to go back to my initial statement. I said the golden years was until 2017. It was the year where the talks for a settlement, for a federal solution in Cyprus failed. And unfortunately, Turkey and the Turkish Cypriot leadership, they switched their policy of supporting unification to a two-state solution, which is in my opinion, is not realistic. So they are now actually actively pursuing a policy where both communities cannot collaborate, cannot live together. The environment is no longer conducive, so there should be a velvet divorce between both sides. This is not perceived as a starting point for any of the other actors I mentioned initially. So under these difficult conditions, the EU is still continuing to support joint policies, joint projects to bring together. I was one of the founders of my NGO, which we believe that the momentum for peace and unification should be kept alive, and we should continue supporting joint initiatives between both sides of the island. I'll just give final words. The status quo in Cyprus is not static, it's evolving. It's evolving to a very wrong direction. Everyone's attention is still on high political issues such as security and militarization. We do not talk about economy, we do not talk about climate change, we do not talk about social rights, food safety, and other issues that directly influence the people's daily lives. When you ask youngsters in Cyprus, they all want to go abroad and find a better life because they visit Europe, they see it's cleaner, the services are better, the salaries are higher for young people. So I really wish to give this message to the international community, but to the EU, particularly to encourage leaders to go back to the negotiation table and to urge civil society organizations to put pressure on their leaders to come up with island-wide policies, island-wide youth policy, island-wide environment policy to better streamline EU's financial assistance.
Thank you very much, Hussein. If this was normal session, it would be finished already, but unfortunately, I know that you are all sleepy. It's not easy to stay that long after the lunch. I was never good at jokes, so I will leave the State Secretary to invite and introduce our Franco-German colleagues today, since I think that he will bring more spirit into the panel and will be woke up a little bit. So, State Secretary, please.
Okay, so we have Franco-German representatives actually here who can share the experience starting from the Second World War. Actually, they're an example of good cooperation. They have a lot of modalities of cooperation. So, Benjamin, actually we met in Paris. During the political consultations that we had, I requested, let's connect the society, let's meet the think tanks. The French Foreign Ministry invited all the think tanks in the ministry, and we discussed openly on all the issues, and Benjamin is already for a second time after that in North Macedonia, supporting various projects, being involved with the youth. So, and let's greet him, and please just, we have to be as brief as possible so that we have enough space, then we will wrap up and go with the second session. And please, share the experience.
Sure. Well, is it? Yes, perfect. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here again, as you were mentioning. I'm here to talk about our models from France and Germany. Of course, I'm going to mention our neighbors to this conversation, but first I wanted to emphasize also as a research fellow on enlargement, the importance of regional cooperation. I think yesterday, former Minister of Defense of North Macedonia, Radmila Shekerinska, if I'm right, mentioned Jacques Lutnik, which is a French expert on the region, and say that the Balkan question is a European question. And indeed, I think that it's by achieving this regional cooperation that we can together build a broader European project. So in this context, what inspiration can we draw from the French point of view? So I think I will try to divide my speech in two parts. First, the empowerment, the political empowerment, and then the civil society empowerment, and precisely what we do at the Jacques Delors Institute as a French think tank. So first thing is on political empowerment, and I think this is something that is really necessary today to make sure that youth has the possibility to take the lead on some topics, because we need to have this step to speak up for ourselves. So in this sense, what is something that I think inspiring from the French point of view is the different bilateral friendship and cooperation treaties that we set. Of course, the historic one is with Germany. We marked this year the 60th anniversary of this treaty, the Élysée Treaty. But recently, the current government has re-engaged in this process with Italy, with the Quirinale Treaty in 2021, and with Spain this year, the Barcelona Treaty, showing that this process, even if we have good neighborly relations, is still needed to make sure that we ensure mutual trust and socialization. So to give an example of, as I was mentioning, the Élysée Treaty, which is really the one consecrating the importance of youth in our bilateral relations. And youth chapters have been included in all the treaties I've been mentioning. So, concrete example from the Élysée Treaty, first one is the OFAGE, the Office Franco-Allemand de la Jeunesse, so the Franco-German Office for Youth, which has inspired the RICO, actually, that we have seen operating here in the Balkans. I know that we have some representative on the other RICO here. So, first of all, the OFAGE was set up and allowed I think now we are like almost 500,000 of French and German young people to visit the other country. So it supported mobility, reconciliation after the events that happened during the Second World War between France and Germany. So that is something that is, I think, inspiring, and that has not always been taken into account, I think, with other examples of friendship and cooperation treaty that we have seen, especially in the region. Second thing that is important, and I will mention again the 60th anniversary of the Élysée Treaty, to see how today we can still, as I was saying, keep building this mutual trust and mutual to get to know each other. This year, the French government and the German government decided to give 60,000 free tickets to French young people and German young people aged from 18 to 27 to make sure that they could visit each other's country, which is a concrete step that young people can see, and it's for a whole week with unlimited travel. So that's kind of something that I think, if it were implemented in other regions, would create, of course, this mutual socialization and trust, as I will mention it. The second part, and I will finish by this, is the civil society empowerment, which for me is also important. As apart from my work as a researcher on EU enlargement, I'm also the education manager of the Académie Notre Europe, our Europe Academy, if I translate it. So in this sense, what we are trying to do at the Jacques Delors Institute is to ensure a cross-border training. Right now we have more than 100 students, more than 20 nationalities, intra-EU, extra-EU. And that is how we try to foster this multinational interactions and trying to empower as well youth by concrete actions. So we have these young students, and whether they are from Serbia, Bulgaria, or Colombia, the US, France, they can still have this formation of European, I say European, not EU, minds and citizenship, this European feeling, this broad regional integration, as I was mentioning. It's not about specific regional integration between France and Germany or between different countries in this specific region, but it's also a broad regional multinational interaction that we are trying to set up. And to finish by this concrete project, or by example, for example, like going to schools, to high schools, talking to students about what is the EU, why it matters, just trying to explain the basic situation of what is the EU and what it represents for us today and what it brings to us. And second thing, for example, we have been also working with the OECD and making sure that our students participated in the youth workshops that are usually organized before the Leaders is a Summit, and so that these young people can present their recommendations. So this is all that I have to say. I'm also open to your questions, and I hope this French point of view can be inspiring to some. Thank you.
Okay, and now we go to Frauke. Of course, Germany need to reconcile it with a lot of neighbors, but they have very good relations with all the neighbors, and the youth also cooperates there. So please, can you share us like what experience can we implement here in the Western Balkans?
Yes, thank you. I mean, maybe we are also a good example of how if you make difficult contracts like the Élysée contract, how future generations can profit from this, because I think there was not even a thought of enmity between us given our nationalities. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. Also, congratulations to a great forum that has been happening so far. I know it's not the best job to be at the end of a conference, but it is like there's an advantage of being able to pick up things that have already been said, and I will do this a little bit. So I represent a grassroots think tank from Berlin for foreign and European politics, in German for European politics. And at the same time, we are a volunteer-based youth organization. So these two things go hand in hand for us, because our aim is to empower young people to actually get active and contribute their voice to foreign and European politics in the German discourse, which is something that was not very present before. It's still underrepresented, let's say, but I think we contribute a little bit to making it a little bit better. And this is also what we are striving for. And we do this in Germany and with German civil society, but we also do this in different international projects. Whenever we can, we collaborate with international partners. For example, me personally, I've worked with Georgian youth. One of them was actually a German-French Georgian project as well, and Ukraine before 2022, clearly. The idea behind this, or what our actually raison d'etre really is that we are convinced that youth are crucial, obviously actors for change in any democratic society, and especially in a region where you have a young population, as the minister mentioned, that is the greatest asset, but that also we cannot afford to leave behind. And what is really crucial, and this has also been mentioned, for example, by Joshua, but also by other speakers throughout the conference, is that this participation needs to be meaningful, especially when it comes to democratization processes, for them to be sustainable long term.
And then, if I may, as a think tanker, give some recommendations. Hopefully some policymakers, decision makers are still listening, maybe they're watching this live on YouTube, to say or to give some of our experiences that probably some of the speakers share of how this potential can actually be activated in the society. So, of course, the first step, the most important step, is to enable, to create enabling conditions within the society and mainstream youth as a central factor throughout any policy programming. I think what this means we saw very well in this forum, as has already been mentioned, and this is something that needs to be mainstream throughout policy programming. And secondly, as I mentioned, again, it needs to be meaningful. This means that we need a real participation, a real ownership, and an actual responsibility, and at the same time to be able to use this as a learning process, as a common learning process, which is something that we always strive to do. So we share our experiences, we learn new things, and this is how actually we evolve as individuals and also as democratic beings, let's say. And what we've seen in the past a lot also in the region is that there have been more people coming in making youth trainings, and then you have people certificate hunting basically. But this, as has been mentioned before, is more kind of a tokenism than an actual real participation. And this is what we are thriving for, and this is what we try to encourage elsewhere as well. And as I mentioned, only if you have this real ownership can it be meaningful, can it be sustainable, and again, this is true for any democratic society, including my own, obviously, where this is also obviously not perfect. So I think it's also something that hopefully as a European family we can engage in together, and this is not something that we, the EU countries, show the Western Balkans, but this is something we can possibly learn together, which would be great. And when it comes to regional cooperation, which is obviously our topic, any regional formats obviously should also include a youth component in their planning, and including, of course, giving youth active roles in this. I don't know, maybe the formats that have already been presented from my Nordic colleagues can be a very good baseline for this. And of course, we need sustainable funding for this. And I think here we have another asset that can be activated and that can help overcome additional issues that especially youth face, and this is if we activate the private sector as well. On the one hand, because we've already heard about skill gaps, we know that the labor market and education don't always go hand in hand, let's say, and so this is a win-win situation for a private sector, for youth, and maybe win-win-win if we include society more broadly. And then why is the private sector actually perfect for this? Because on the one hand, what I mentioned, so they profit from this as well as for future labor, but they also, even if tensions are really high on the political level, they are the ones who continue cooperating because they have to. This is the way they operate, and otherwise it doesn't continue for them. So I think multi-sector cooperation, also in our experience, can be a vital tool, can be a great asset if activated comprehensively and sensibly, let's say. Two small points left. One is what can the EU and other outside actors actually do, including maybe my own government. Of course, they cannot bring regional cooperation, good neighborly relationships. This is something that has to come from within, and it does come from within. But of course, they can help in enabling this or creating this enabling environment, also from the outside, let's say, or by providing initiatives such as was already mentioned, Erasmus+, Creative Europe program, that actually enables young people to get together and get active together. And then we also, this was already mentioned, I think there was a representative here from RICO, the Regional Youth Cooperation Office, that was created as part of the Berlin process. And I think this is a great example also of having created a tool for regional youth cooperation. One last point, which is maybe a bit more somber in a way, would be that obviously, no matter how great your civil society is and no matter how active it is, of course, bottom-up alone is not enough. So you need the top-down factor. You need the government to help in enabling these factors. And then you need civil society more broadly to help enabling these conditions. And especially when we look at the region, we see that there are some very obvious spoilers to this process. And we see that they actually harm intentionally good neighborly relationships within and among societies in the region, and weaken democratic institutions. and that the international actors who have a very strong position in this not only do not sanction this oftentimes, but often even fail to address it. A colleague of mine recently called this a very loud silence. And I just want to appeal to whoever is listening that this is a time of war. So war has been forced back upon Europe. And I think that at this time, more than ever, I mean, this is true always, but especially now, that the European Union and its member states and all the partners should stand with those people that are supporting the values, that are actually striving for reconciliation, for good neighborly relationships, and should call out those who are actually benefiting from putting roadblocks to these reconciliation processes. And I'm appealing also to my own government, to international partners, to the EU, because I think this is a very, very dangerous tendency that we see, and that is, I think, the biggest harm to good neighborly relations. And I leave it here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Frauke. I will ask the remaining two participants to be as short as possible, because we will try to squeeze in so that everybody gets a chance. Also, then we will move to the second panel. So we have two more regions represented, actually. We have, let's start with the representative of one of the Visegrad countries, so it's Pavel from the Czech Republic. What can you tell us about useful experiences in youth cooperation among the Visegrad countries?
Thank you so much, Philip. Thank you so much, State Secretary. I will be speaking on three broad points, brief points actually, on youth engagement, but also experience of Central Europe, because our friends from Lithuania, they consider themselves to be either Baltic or Nordic countries. So I will be here speaking from the only Central European point of view, and I will try to share some good practice actually on this. First, maybe just to give you a heads up on a Central European point of view, because when I was listening to many of the interventions today, I actually felt saddened by lack of regional cooperation in the region so far. When we are speaking and working with our friends and colleagues from Western Balkan countries, it always strikes me how it's so hard, to actually even visit each other, that you need visas to visit from each other from another country. I remember my own experience on a personal note, that I started to be socialized in this Visegrad Central European point of view when I was around the age of 20, when I visited my first Visegrad summer school in Krakow, when I got to know my peers actually from the regions. This is actually how it should be, not to apply for visas to go to a neighboring country. So that's just something that always strikes me, coming from Central Eastern Europe. A second point, very briefly, I would like to showcase two concrete examples of what we in the Czech Republic actually went through when it comes to youth policies. As you, Philip, mentioned, this is what we are discussing here today, and actually this is where, again, we might share some good practice. First of all is obviously something that you might have heard about, and this is very impressive, always great relations between Czechs and Slovaks. Even in difficult times, when not only the region was outside of the European core and outside of Eurozone and Euro integration, but also at the outskirts for very much authoritarian tendencies during 1990s in neighboring Slovakia. Czech Republic never forgot about young people, but also the Slovak citizens in general, when, for example, allowing them to come to Czech Republic, to study for free, we kept our open arms, to basically facilitate a dialogue and actually work on what's best in the region. And this is really about the people, it's the civil society, it's the independent phase, not always the highest top-level leadership. If now you mentioned Central Europe, people like Orban, or what we heard today from the Croat president, this is not what Europe and Central Europe should be about, but there are other better faces, and this is really when it comes to youth, civil society, and other of the critical voices in the society. So this is example of good practice. And another one actually, and my colleague next to me from Germany is actually one of the participants of one of the programs that we run in the Association for International Affairs, which is the dialogue between Czechia and Germany. For the last more than 25 years, since signing of the Czech-German Future Cooperation Treaty, we are running and investing in our future. And the motto back in the 1990s was actually, let's not forget about what happened in the past, more than 70 years now ago, but actually let's look into the future. Let's overcome and focus on what's the best, And this is once again work with the young generation, and actually that's why we, for a number of years in the association, invest in the Czech-German professional program, in which many, actually dozens of people by now participated and found ways actually to get to know the neighbors. So I'm very happy that we are sitting here together actually at this forum. So these two examples can be indeed showcased coming from the Czech Republic. And maybe finally, I will just focus on what we are now together doing with Ilya, actually, because Philip mentioned our recent meeting in Ohrid, just on the other side of this beautiful lake. And this is actually trying to extend our sort of past experience to the Western Balkan countries. And for that, actually, I have I'm so proud and honored, actually, that I can mentor a group of young people from the Western Balkan 6 countries when actually coming up with concrete solutions, how to promote regional cooperation, how to promote more of youth engagement and youth participation. And we will be actually working and overcoming some really difficult challenges, when it comes to security and also foreign policy related topics in our concrete instance, actually fight against disinformation and unregistered media. That is a problem all around the 6 countries. So we will be focusing on this. I have a great pleasure that it's my second time already within a month's time that I can be here with you in North Macedonia, making benefit of your hospitality, which is so immense. Thank you so much for that. And we will be actually very happy to invest back, because we have been through similar experience that you are now facing, a lot of animosity, lack of trust, not always friendly neighborly relations, but we are, I hope, past that, and we are actually able and in position to share that some of that with you. So here, wind is blowing again, so I hope we will stay strong here and resilient, and I will probably pass the floor back to you, Philip. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Pavel. And now we have the representative from the last region, from the Baltic countries. Actually, we have Leva from Lithuania, and they don't have that structured cooperation that you would have among the countries of the Nordic Council, but she can say how they cooperate among youth organizations, civil organizations, among the Baltic countries. Please.
Yeah, so hello everyone. So as it was mentioned, there is no such a great structure as in Nordic countries, in Baltic countries regarding as youth cooperation, but Baltic countries has some cooperation in other fields, but as we now are concentrating into youth, so I'm not talking about those other fields. So actually I come from an NGO, from very practical NGO, which concentrates into defending human rights and empowering different groups, and one of target groups is youth. So actually I can speak from the point of view of my organization, what we do and how we see cooperation. So we have few very exact examples how we use international partnerships to explore and find new ways of doing things, and maybe to find some new opportunities which we haven't seen before. So, for example, I see partnership, a lot of people here are talking that neighborly relations, neighborly relations is important, and I really agree to that. But I think that not only neighborly relations, but other international cooperations is important. And for example, I see cooperation as a tool to somehow, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, so I'm trying to reach to my point. So I see cooperation as a way of doing the things that you have never thought about in a different context.
Yes. No problem. So due to security reasons, we have stormy weather. We will move a little bit there. And we
it's not easy to be in the hot chair today, but we wanted to keep at the end. So
yes, it's not the end. We are just moving there